And they will be specifically focused on how we begin to build the consensus necessary for a substantive outcome in Copenhagen. Going back to what I said in my earlier remarks before, there is a temptation on the part of some to assume that climate change simply becomes too difficult, too hard to deal with in various parts of the world because we now confront a global economic recession. I do not share that view. I believe we have a responsibility to the planet to act. It will be politically difficult to act in many countries because of the constraints which the recession globally will impose. But I believe we must therefore exert every effort between now and mid-year and in each stepping stone to Copenhagen with a view to yielding a success. The road will be hard, the obstacles are great, but our resolve is steady.
There are two challenges we've got to meet in the road to Copenhagen. The first is we've got to get to other countries to agree both intermediate and long-term targets for carbon emissions. And I believe the challenge is to persuade America, of course, and then persuade many of the emerging markets that they must accept not only large cuts in emissions over the next 40 years, but immediate cuts in emissions that will show results in the next few years. And then the second thing is the financial mechanism by which we can help poorer countries. If we cannot help the poorest countries develop energy-efficient technologies and allow them the resources that will enable them to move to low-carbon rather than high-carbon sources of energy, then we will not get the changes we want. So we will have to provide and show that there is a financial means by which we can support developing countries and emerging markets to move, for example, from coal-fired power stations to sources of renewable energy, which will in the short term be more expensive. Now, on that road, I think we've got to insist that the world is changing and that we need a low-carbon recovery. In other words, as we invest out of this downturn, we should invest in low-carbon products and processes, low-carbon technologies, move, for example, while the oil price is lower, to the electric and low-carbon vehicles for cars and for other lorries and everything else, and at the same time, of course, green our buildings, green our homes, green our communities. Now, this is one of the ways that we can not only invest out of recession, but create the jobs that we need for the future. So it is a huge and purposeful challenge that all of us have to meet.
You've both argued in what you've said that the market needs a very strong moral context, and you've also said that regulation must play a role in that. But a question here, values, virtues, trust particularly, takes a very long time to implant and restore. And how do we really help to build a moral consensus that's in the DNA and not just in the rule book?
Absolutely, but remember, it took 16 years after the Wall Street crash for world leaders to come together to even attempt to rebuild the global economy. And these 16 years were wasted years in which we saw protectionism and then all the other evils that fell from that. We have acted quickly to bring people together. The basis of my speech is there a basis for a global society? Is there a basis in this globalized economy for people with shared values to agree shared rules for running that economy? And I believe we're further along that process than people think, that there is a basis in a shared global ethic, that there is a basis in people now coming together to try and formulate shared global rules based on that ethic. And I hope coming out of the London summit we will see the first steps towards creating that truly global society based on the values that we hold to be important. So there is no time to waste. We must move ahead with it. And I believe you'll see the summit starting that process. But of course, it cannot be done by governments alone. It has got to be the shared values of people demanding change. And that's why your role in this is so important. If we can together work out the shared values and shared rules which govern this new global society, not going back to the old national rules, but global rules, then I think that the strength of public opinion in this internet age, where we can communicate with each other across the world, could make such an enormous difference. So the issue is not just for governments, it's for all of us working together.
I think the common feeling in this gathering today, but in gatherings like it right across the world, is simply this. In recent times, we've just got the balance wrong. And there's been, I think, an emerging sense of disquiet over a long period of time about the fact that the balance between individual and the community, between markets and government, has simply got out of kilter. And I think when we've looked at our friends in the corporate community, it's true that we've seen great examples of corporate excess, which everyone is familiar with. We've also seen great acts of corporate responsibility. And let us hold this within a common reality. And our friends in the corporate world, as both Gordon and I defend the principle of open markets, I think themselves feel that their sense of balance has been undone in recent times as well. So how do we pull it back? I think a very important part of Gordon's presentation before was his reflection on where the great religious and faith traditions of the world take us. And I thought it was an elegant exposition of the great traditions of faith, all of which have this common principle, which is an action for self being consistent with its impact on another. That is work which has been done over the centuries and the millennia by those who have preceded us in our various civilizational and religious traditions. It is simply taking that great wisdom and restoring the balance which, in a perversion of the balance, in the last couple of decades, has got it all wrong. And the rules, which Gordon has been working on hugely through the G20 processes as the host for this great summit, that are being crafted, those new rules, begin to push that balance back in the right direction. Nothing is perfect in this business, but I think we are heading now in a much better direction.
In restoring that balance, do you see a role for schools? How would you want to change the educational context in which those values are learnt, in the light of what you've said?
I have an enormous faith in the kids of the world, just an enormous faith in them. One of the most... My wife, Therese, and I, as we walked into this great cathedral this morning, were just taken by those young people in the choir. You know, life, hope, vitality, but an essential goodness. And whether you are running into kids in a group in the back blocks of Papua New Guinea, up in the highlands, and the islands of the South Pacific, and rural villages across Asia, in some of the poorest communities in urban America, what I see with young people are enormous vessels of hope. The other great thing about the emerging young generation of people across so many countries is that they are blind to the traditional divides of race and religion. I think we are at an unprecedented turning point in able to harness this great potential. So how is this done in the schools and how is it taken better? Each national jurisdiction will resolve that according to its laws and its practices. But my